First, I have to say that we are very proud of our project, but we're probably even more delighted that we were included in this. The children's garden was the response to poor science scores in the United States, and this was directly developed for that reason. The garden itself is 8 acres. At the bottom of the screen, you see a circle. That's where you enter. And unfolding over the 8 acres are 15 teaching galleries. The galleries are kind of the equivalent of 2,000 to 3,000 square foot rooms. Each one is themed differently. There are other activities. When you go in a teaching gallery, you have a minimum of 10 different interactive circuits that you can take. And when we described this project to stakeholders at the very early stages, we said, think of it as a museum, science museum, visitor center. Now take the walls away. In other words, that's the effect we were trying to get, to enable children to experience nature, immersed in nature. Oops, okay, I'll get the hang of this. So the project really began in 2006. We worked very heavily with the Arboretum to develop from their master plan programming documents that would look at the audience reactions, what we were going to teach children, and more importantly, what was the look and feel of each of these galleries. It was very important for the Arboretum to have this be an expression of their personality, their character, not be driven by an architect's perspective or a landscape architect's perspective. Groundbreaking was in 2010, and we opened in 2013. This gives you kind of an idea of how we would look at activities, behaviors, key messages, very much like an interpretive plan, and what might happen in each gallery. Now, this was programmed before the landscape architect and architect then came on. They were still part of our team, but we didn't start to look at planning until then. It began in very traditional disciplines, typical drawings. How do we lay out these 15 rooms? How do they fit within the site? Dealing with slope. Each activity, how does it fit within that 2,000 square foot space? Because you're working around natural obstacles. And then what are those activities? And the capacity. In other words, if you have 30 kids, what do they get to do in these areas? And then we looked at, we have a 10,000 square foot discovery center in the center of the garden that is enclosed air-conditioned space. And for the architect, it was, by the way, you're designing this building. Most importantly, it shouldn't look like anything. We don't want people to even see it or notice it. So the building itself is knifed into the hillside and it has a fully functional green roof that's also another outdoor gallery. Early on, we made, beyond the sketches that started the ideas and kind of made all of us have a common visual agreement, we developed a detailed model of the garden. And this was used by Mary as a fundraising tool. People would come to her office. You drove it all over. It traveled many places. And then as time went on, we had to, as we had more data, it was turned into a computer-generated fly-through. And that gave the ability to spread further in terms of where we could reach for financial asks. The most important milestone we achieved was when Rory and Howard Meyers pledged $12 million as the START grant and challenged the community to match that. And that was sort of the start of everything. Now, the site itself, I will say it was a challenge. We had 8 acres of invasive bamboo that had killed just about every native plant in sight. We then had to go in and try and find what was still left alive. The team, not the design team, I should say, Mary's team, had to use machetes to cut their way through the paths. They wouldn't let the designers use machetes. And as we went through, we were looking for trees, canopy areas. Now, the invasive bamboo had to be removed. So now we have a garden that we have to scrub clean. So the only things left were those few trees that we did maintain, and we start to sculpt it for that building that I described earlier that's going to be embedded into the earth. One of the other questions was, how are we building these structures? The architects had a very organic, very fluid building. And the decision was made with 18 months, we needed to do poured in place concrete structures. Once that decision was made, the rain never stopped. What would be described to us as frog choking rain. And so for the first few months, it was just the biggest mud pit you could imagine. We also looked at the grade, and that was a big challenge too, because the site from where you entered in that circular plaza that we talked about drops 50 feet over the whole garden. So we also knew that we were going to need to have a way to make this accessible, not only through the pathways, but for rapid movement. So in the very lowest point of the garden, there is a tower that has an elevator in it, and that's connected to a 200-foot walkway that brings you up to the front. Now, we called this threading the needle because with this 200-foot skywalk, we wanted something that was going to be very gentle on the land. It has an epay deck. It's about 20 foot on average over the grade. But it needed to meet up with the elevator, thread through trees, also go to a secondary element that we had. And we were winding our way through the garden over very specific galleries. One of the points is we have a habitat gallery that's a two-tiered gallery, where you're on the ground in the habitat below, and then you get to go up into the trees to experience treetop habitats. And this walkway also needed to connect to that with an action bridge. So after everything was threaded through and everything was done, children experienced this as a very beautiful canopy walk that only gets better in time because the trees obviously grow. I know you all probably within your business struggle with the mix of artificial and real. It was the Arboretum's desire to use as many natural materials as possible. But then on things like signage, we were matching corian, porcelain enamel signs for donors, so that we'd have a very smooth blend between things. Once all the pathways were in, the infrastructure for data, power, because you're delivering this to these galleries just like they're rooms in a building, water, irrigation, drains. The site looked like this. And most of the neighbors went, "Oh my gosh, it's a theme park." Well, it is a garden, and 67,715 plants were specified and installed, along with the Arboretum installing all the seasonal plantings that supported all of the other exhibits. The topography in the site and the plants growing create these spaces that just unveil themselves as you walk down the pathways. And anyone who's going to the gala, we hope you'll see our 2-minute sizzle reel where you see this come together as a very beautiful space. Plants will grow over time, but a big question for anyone doing botanical work is, can you wait? I mean, it's like a bad hair transplant. You have little spuds in the beginning. And yes, they're economical, but you're going to see some of the scalp. And so, just remember, can you wait? Because time will make it look better. We talk about the idea of learning. And this statement came out as part of the Vice President of Education. And the point was, and I want to be able to read it, how do we make this, using the best practices of education, have meaning for children so they really understand? There's a controversy with gardens and whether or not children should just be allowed to go out, play, discover on their own. Well, education was an initiative here. And also, if you're a child growing up in the city and you've never walked in the woods, you've never experienced up-close wildlife, it isn't necessarily something that you're going to understand, let alone scientific processes. 30 to 35 school groups go through a day. So the garden absorbs in the morning 800 children on an average. 2015, 122,000 children alone visited, and this is just field trips. And then in the total numbers,
250,000 more coming with families.
now each group is led, school group is led by a degreed teacher, and we're reaching out to 4th and 5th grades. This was evaluated by Southern Methodist University. They've been a partner in the project. And after visiting the garden, and this is a 60-minute to 90-minute visitation, when children were tested again on their science scores, on an average they had a 17.7% increase in knowledge and upwards to 30% in some areas. And that was only having a 60-minute exposure to being immersed in nature and trying to understand and experience nature. Pathways have, thank you. No stone goes unturned in this garden without an educational message. and one of the challenges was to make sure that we have a lot of walkways because of accessibility, that have gentle serpentine paths, but we wanted them to be beautiful and also deliver messages. We wanted to keep the aesthetics. Each of the galleries functions in a way that is, I'm checking clocks right now. Each of the galleries functions so that there's a lobby, and then there's the teaching or the learning space. We did this so that first the lobby gathers kids, you can wrangle your school group, get some semblance of order if that's possible, and then go into the learning space. But it was also done so that if you're in the general public and you arrive and this space has been reserved, there's still a reward. For instance, this is a huge kaleidoscope, but every single gallery has a lobby with something to reward you if you can't get in at that time. And it also posts when you can get in so that you don't have that want moment. Programming spaces are for 30 students. Each one was designed to have the characteristic of the gallery you're in. So if it's in the wetlands, it may be very secretive. If it's habitats, you're in a giant nest. There's an overturned flower pot in another one. These have video monitors, lab counters, all the tools that teachers need. I'm going to go very quickly through the garden itself in sort of a slideshow manner just to give you a sneak preview of some of the things. The first adventure is for toddlers. It's all about being in nature and kind of experiencing natural things. It's about moments in this garden. We move into what is called the Incredible Edible Garden. That's a picnic area that absorbs probably at least 100, I think. And it's for school groups and public to have picnic tables. But again, we wanted them to learn about food, where their food comes from, that we eat plants. And the idea was to have an area that has growing beds, that has all different kinds of interpretive opportunities, talks about international foods. And again, as you can see with that young man on the left, the question is, so that's where bananas come from. I mean, it literally was to enable them to understand what they eat. We hid mechanics under and around water features. Water features are also part of a heat pump system. At the end, I can point out what we did for sustainability. This is a view into the Exploration Center. The top gallery is a garden. And again, as you can see, it's just kind of very low profile. There were a lot of pieces of equipment that we wanted kids to work with. We have a full lab. We also have a lot of kind of whiz-bang things. We have an omniglobe where we do everything from planetary movement to clouds to deforestation. And we also have areas where we can give them the tools of science to work with. We have a CSI game where it's Who Killed the Plant? We have all types of activities, but these are things that couldn't take it outside. Because again, everything that you have that you've built that's hands-on has to be able to take insects, rain, hail, children, yes, actually, that's probably the most destructive force. And plants are alive, it's supersized because what we're talking about are things that are really small. There's a lot of different things for them to do. Living cycles gives them up close with a lot of insects and small amphibians you get to see, like a bee. When you go to the Earth cycles, it's everything from planetary movement to weather to geology. They're exploring, erosion. The habitats is far more natural. It's about how the wildlife live in shelter and eat. You go up and you have a cargo net up above where you can walk in the clouds. This is that two-tiered gallery that we talked about. The Texas native wetlands is probably our most primitive. And we even have a maze that's reconfigurable, so it's not one and done if you come back the next year. And then pure energy is very much solar, wind, and water, hands-on, different things. That's a view of the elevator tower and the walkway. Now, as we move to the end of this, sustainable features. We used recycled materials whenever possible, planted the roof to reduce heat. We have low-flow plumbing, solar panels, a cistern that collects the rainwater. People have asked us if it was LEED certified. For landscapes, only now, as of June 10th, 2015, the Green Business Certification Program is starting to look at landscapes for certifying them. Again, these are some of the things that made this a great project. There you're looking at future environmental scientists and maybe a president. Next time, things that we would do. Stakeholders. When you have a lot of stakeholders in a project, you've got to manage expectations. Enthusiasm grows. Stakeholders say to you, can you make 3 of those? You didn't have that in the original budget. Always question the low bid. I mean, that's something that I think all of you know. And always build a back door in. If you have underperforming vendors, kick them out, replace them, and don't be afraid to do that. Best memories. Opening day.
Most certainly.
Because, oh God, it's over. And then again, best memories for me personally, having your ideas realized, seeing the kids doing what you want them to do, what you hope they'll do, seeing what you wish they wouldn't do. The Arboretum, my office, we thank you for this opportunity, and especially my team, we were the lead, the exhibit designers. Very seldom do we get to be the lead over the architects and the landscape architects, and we are very happy about that. And that's it. So.
Did a great job.
We have a nice 11 minutes or so for Q&A, so look around, raise your hands, find a mic runner.
You may have answered all the questions.
Yeah.
When you start designing the learning experience, do you start with the plants or do you start with the people?
In this case, first we start with, this is organized around core curriculum. So there are certain messages that you're looking at geared towards certain age groups. Now, the garden, when you're talking about the plants, you try to match plants that best interpret the scientific principles that you have. So if, for instance, you're talking about bees and pollination, you want to make sure that the plantings have the appropriate plants that butterflies and bees would be attracted to. So it kind of is a very integrated approach. You know, if it's plants in the toddler area, you want ones that are safe for them to touch because we encourage them to touch, to smell, to eat. And we also don't want them to die, which is really important. So I think it becomes a very integrated design plan.
I just have a question. Many of us design play areas and things for children, and you mentioned the destructive forces and behavior of children. Can you share any experiences of things you noticed now that it's been installed, or things that you wish you would have done differently to help combat against some of that destructive behavior?
I think that early on, one of the more interesting things that the landscape architects found was the amazing ability to climb in children. And it reminded me of when I worked on a zoo project where they were testing to make sure that the angles were raked enough so that gorillas couldn't get out. And I thought, that's pretty close. But I think that some of it is just the sheer wear and tear, do you know what I mean, of kids when they're not motivated. Now, in this case, we've got a docent or a teacher with them, so there's a little bit of guidance, but you still have kids that if they, it's passive-aggressive behavior, you know, they're going to keep clicking something until someone notices them. So I think that sometimes being able to just pay attention to the kids that are in the space, not necessarily tell them what to do, but give them some notice so that, you know, they don't have to exert force to have a voice. You know, we would use stainless steel, rugged, basic, lot of off-the-shelf, not state-of-the-art items, because you've got to repair them quickly, and you don't want to break the bank constantly having to go back to a builder to get special connectors.
Additionally, with items such as the different leaves in Build a Plant, which you saw, one of the prerequisites that we had for Andy every step along the way was to make sure that they had smooth edges, that if indeed a child had one and bopped another child over the head, there wouldn't be brain damage. They needed to be light and movable, but what a child can do to items was foremost in our mind. As she was talking about climbing, we had never considered that some of the retaining walls that we had around the garden, because it has this 50-foot drop, would be seen as climbing walls for children. So there are no ropes, there's nothing. They're headed up, you know, holding on to pieces of rock. We have now docents and volunteers that are stationed along the way. You want it to be accessible, but you don't want to have to rope things off. So it's a real trick along the way.
The docents carry big sticks.
Sure.
And they flick them off the wall. But I think that probably the most damage that probably occurred in the first year was to outdoor electronics. Monitors that were ruggedized, guaranteed for outdoor use in the temperatures,
Exactly.
but Dallas had sweltering heat first summer, and it fried a few of the screens, like, you know, just instantly. So I think that was probably some of the heat was probably more damaging the first year than
We
the
really
kids.
wanted computers, touch screens, if you will, that could endure the outside weather. So they offered us a material they said was military grade. And we thought, well, that's good enough for these children. And they said that, of course, they could make it in Afghanistan or this or that. So most certainly they could make it in the heat and rain of Dallas. But indeed, it was not true. So
Okay, we have another
it took us a
question.
while, but we got the right product.
Never trust those military
No,
suppliers.
All right, we've got another question over here. Kirsten?
Hi, I'm Kirsten Taylor Hall from Think Well, and I was interested about your fundraising journey. You mentioned a really significant $12 million gift. I was wondering what your overall fundraising goal had to be and how long it took you, if you don't mind sharing.
No, not at all. At the end of the day, we raised $64 million. That was not all for this garden. It also had to include some parking that went around it and some ancillary areas. But unless you have the parking, you really can't have the experience. When we started out, everybody in fundraising makes a donor pyramid. But the first thing you have to know is how much will it really cost. We were staying close to Andy and the design team every step along the way. And as we would add things, such as an additional service, if you will, or a change order here or there, there's always a cost associated with that. So I kept close to them on that. The building of the model for us was the most exciting piece. I took it to Boone Pickens, for example, in Dallas, who may be well known to you. And a few weeks later, he invited me back to pick up a check for $2 million. So that was a good thing, but I needed that model. models just like a child's play material. Let you come into the garden itself and see yourself as being a part of it. I needed a lead gift. When we determined that the original budget was $38 million, this is before the parking features and all of that, I asked that the lead gift be 15, and this family stepped up to it. Their prerequisite was that I had 1 year and 3 months to raise the amount to get to $38 to $40 million, or the gift was no longer there. That was a wonderful impetus, though, because we were wired and moving fast. And no one in Dallas or in any major city wants to think that their city would lose out on something that's important. Our science scores in Texas are terrible. They're abysmal. And they're the lowest rated of anything tested. And in the science area, our area, which is life and earth science, is the lowest rated of those. So people believe in a good plan, and we had it. When we built this garden, we did not want it to be like any other children's garden around the country. And when we sent out the RFQ, we most certainly included those other designers. But at the end of the day, we were really looking for someone that would imaginatively work on our project. We wanted it in line with state and national curriculum standards, because that would assure that I got field trips of quality every day of the year. But we made it fun too. So that was the best of all. So after the $15 million gift, then in my pyramid, I started dividing it into $5 million gifts, $2 million, $1 million, whatever. Then we started going down, with the lowest gift being $25,000 to be on a donor wall. But gifts were still coming in later on, and we kept finding more ways to carve into that wall. And so it really worked out well. We were very happy.
Hi, Richard Bent, Richard Allen Productions. What type of environmental impact studies or requirements were necessary to, or what kind of hurdles did you have to go through to get final approval?
Well, when the master plan was first developed, it was developed and presented to the city, because the land itself is owned by the city of Dallas. And they did an initial environmental impact statement to see what the development of this north end of the property would mean. And then once it was put in place, then a secondary study was made, mainly about water flow and any erosion issues that might occur because of the slope. Because the water starts at the top, and it's actually a natural flow that goes into that lagoon where the energy exhibits are, flows out into the wetlands. And then there is sort of a recycling section, and then storm flow goes to the lake that's beyond it. So it was only that was, I think, what the city looked at.
And the city assigns a particular individual to stay with us every step along the way. So there are serious EPA prerequisites that we have to follow, and we did that each step. So especially with everything that Andy pointed out, with being able to use recycled materials, being able to catch stormwater, the recycling effort, which was extremely expensive. The water recirculates in 3 different patterns. At the top, the water is much cleaner because you have young children playing in the first adventure area and over in the incredible edible. But when you're at in the middle section, it has to recirculate to give the heating and cooling for the the exploration center. And at the bottom, you've got a wetlands, and you really need for that water to be the natural home of the ecosystems that are there. So it's a really interesting problem. And then we had topography problems, and of course, people that live around a lake of any kind are concerned about environmental issues.
Thank you very much. It's been a fabulous presentation. I know there are more questions out there. See them at the break.